Here we go. So today I wanted to focus on this NPM line chart reproduction. So let's say you're looking at a package. There's this weekly downloads chart right here. And for a while now, I've been looking at this and thinking, wow, this is a nice piece of interactive data visualization right here. And it probably uses D3 internally, although I don't know for sure. So I was thinking to do this live stream and make a video about, like, if you had to reproduce this exact thing, how would you do it? What does that code look like? And I think, it doesn't really matter what package we look at. But, hey, why not do D3 itself? Has what, 2 million or so, 3 million weekly downloads. It's a pretty popular package. So I want to make this visual and also the interaction, where when you hover, it shows a line and then it updates the date range and the number. So I don't have the data for this though, so I don't know where that's going to come from. Maybe we should start with the data. If we inspect this element here, we can sort of see, it's an SVG. But my question is, how does this page get the data? Can we get the data right out of this page? And so if I search for that exact number in the source code of this page, it actually does appear. Oh, but it's kind of tricky to select it. But this page has some server rendered data that we could sort of extract the time series out of. And ideally, to me, we would work with like a CSV of this data. So I think maybe step one is getting the data in CSV format. Because once we have the data, then we can proceed. Without the data, we can make the skeleton of it and maybe put some fake data in there. But I think I'd like to work with the real data. So I'm not sure exactly what the best way to do this is, but I think I'll just start by copying the text of this really long line that has some JSON data in it. And then see if I can get it out. And then where do we put it? Well, maybe let's put it in a gist. So I'm going to go ahead and make a GitHub gist. I like using gist to store little data sets that we can, because we can pull them in. So I'll call this npm d3 downloads data. And I'll just do like a readme.md, like this data was extracted from npm and shows the, or contains, contains the weekly downloads data for the D3 package. So I'll create this gist. And then what I'm thinking is I'm going to clone this locally and then work on the data, output a CSV, and then upload that CSV back to GitHub gist. And then we can fetch it in the front end, in the VizHub code. So I'm in a terminal now. I'm going to clone this gist and then cd03, whatever this is. And then I'm going to use Vim just because it's fun. And so here's what I'll do. I'm going to copy that data out of the page and paste it into a text file. Now, it's kind of tricky to copy this, but I'll see what I can do here. So we're getting all this data in here from the server rendered page. And the idea is to boil this down to a CSV file. Wow, it's crazy. It takes a long time to paste. Wonder how much data they put in there anyway. But once we get that, we can search for this number and then isolate the JSON data structure that has the time series. Wow, this is taking forever. Well, I wonder if there's any tool that gives you this data, like npm download stats data, npm stat. There's something called npm stat. Oh wow, look at this. This might be easier. So if I say, all right, for D3, let me get it from, well, how far back does it go anyway? A year? Wow. I didn't realize it went back a whole year. So if I hover, right now we're in July 2024. If we go back here, it's July 2023. All right. So let's do July 2023 up until today. Show charts. Okay, this is what? Daily. Oh, interesting. Ah, here's the weekly data. Now, can we get at this data, though? That's the question. I wonder, is it pulling from some kind of a data source? Okay, here's a request that has some, looks like clean JSON data in it, which is great. Yeah, that's what we need. That's a lot easier than trying to copy paste all that server rendered stuff. This appears to be the daily data, though. Well, I wonder maybe they compute weekly based on the daily, which we could do. All right, so I'm just going to copy that. And then I'll say, okay, data.json. I'm going to paste it in there. Okay, that was a lot quicker. Okay, so it's D3 and it's got keys and values. That's all right. Yeah, we can work with that. And then I should just give a shout out to where I got the data from, which is this page here. The data was extracted from npm stat. And I'll just move that back to the original description. There we go. And then I'll just make a commit to add this. Add JSON data for downloads, and then just push it. Okay, and then if we refresh this gist, we have data.json. All right, sweet. That's how, that's one way you can get the data for this. Now let's visualize this with D3. So I'm going to go to raw here to get this raw URL that I could pull from in the front-end code. And then I'll go over to VizHub and fork this circles with D3 example. I'll call it interactive line chart, or maybe interactive tiny line chart, because you know what it really is? It's an interactive spark line. This term spark line means like little lines that are not full visualizations, but they just give sort of an essential view of it. Okay, interactive spark line. That's what I'll call it. And then in the code here, we want to load some data. I'm going to comment out all the rendering stuff for now, except maybe the SVG, because we're going to need that. And then I'll say const data equals, and then let's make a function, I guess, get data. And the way that this will work is it's going to use unidirectional data flow, which is a pattern that I've set up here in VizHub that works well with hot reloading. And to do that, we can set it up so that getData is a function that maybe returns null if the data is not loaded yet, but it should return instantly. And then we can say if no data, return early and don't do any of the other stuff. And then we can say import getData from /getData, which is a file that I haven't made yet, but I'll make a new file called getData.js. And this will export const getData equals function. And this function should fetch the following URL. And I'll just paste the URL from the gist. This one here. And then I'll say fetch. And let's see if the AI can figure this one out. No, don't just fetch the URL. It's ridiculous. right? Dot then. There we go. Okay, so that should be fetching the data. And it does. We get an object with D3 and the time series. Okay, sweet. So the code that the AI wrote was fetch URL dot then, because the fetch returns a promise, response, and then response.json, which is another async thing that parses the JSON out of the text. And then once we get the data, it says console.log data. And if there's an error, it will log the error out. Okay, so what we want to do here is when we get this data, we want to store that in our state. So I want to call a function called setState, and that the API of this is it takes as input the previous state and returns the new state based on that previous state. So this is immutable update patterns. So I will use whatever's on the previous state, but then also put data on the state. The only problem now is we don't have access to setState, so let's pass that in as an argument or as an option. I like this options object pattern. And then there's something wrong here. There's a syntax error? Oh, I'm missing a closing parentheses. Okay, great. So now we just need to pass this in from index.js. And index.js in turn actually gets access to state and setState out here. And, we can just pass both of these into get data, actually. We're going to need both of these. Because after we call setState, it'll be there on the state. And we only want to fetch if there is no data, or rather if it's not loading. So if state.data is undefined, that's when we want to fetch. I'll move that URL out. Okay, and then otherwise, well, actually, we don't need the else, because in this case, we're going to return null, like I said earlier, to indicate, okay, the data's loading. Don't worry about it. And then, if it is already there, then we return state.data. And now, all of this should work, in theory. So let me just test that by saying console.log data. And we should see it output. Oh, we got some errors. Oh no. It's a VizHub bug. Let me refresh. Oh hey, welcome to the session. Here, let me make it editable by you. In the share settings, I can say anyone can edit, so now you should be able to type with me. Do you have any questions about this setup? State could be a little confusing. But basically it's working. And by the way, I have a bunch of other videos about this pattern with setState. And there's also an open source repository that implements this in vanilla JavaScript. So anyway, we have the data. Now let's visualize it. is this? More bugs. I think this is a bug in VC code. I think it's when the remote user has a different file open. Actually, I think we might have solved this, and I just need to redeploy. I don't know. Sorry about that. All right, so we have our data, and this is the format that it's in. It's in an object with D3 and a bunch of key value pairs where the key is this formatted date and the value is this number. So I want to get this into a different format that we can use with D3, namely an array of objects where each object has the date as a field and then the number as another field. And these should be JavaScript dates. So let's transform this data I'll say, all right, let's make a thing called parsed data. And this we can derive by mapping over data.d3, or rather the object.keys of that. So object.keys is a function that just gives us all the keys of the objects. And I'm curious the ordering of that. So let me just console.log the keys and see if they're in the right order for the time series. Yeah, they seem to be. It starts in 2023 and goes up. Excellent. So now we can map over these with .map. And the key will be made available to us. And I'll just make a note, you know, this is one example value for key. And we want to parse this string into a date. To do that, we can use D3 time parse. So let's assume we have time parse, which we can import from D3. And we're going to use this to create a function to parse this date. And I'll call it parse date. And this is going to be time parse, and we pass in a specifier for this date. And I don't know off the top of my head what that is, but let me give the AI assistant a shot. Might be able to figure that out. Yeah, that looks generally right. Year, month, day. Yes. Thank you, Mr. AI. And then we could say const date equals parse date of key. And that should get us JavaScript dates. So I'll just return that so that we can see in our console.log what the value is for date. And sure enough, it looks like JavaScript dates. Yep. Yep, they all have prototypes for JavaScript date. Excellent, excellent. Now we need to parse the values. And the values are just numbers. And they're already parsed as numbers because that's how they came through in the JSON. So I think we just need to return a row object that has date as one field and then value, or I guess, we could be a little more specific, like num downloads. And that's going to be data.3, scratch that, data.d3 at the key. All right, that should work. Okay, sweet. Now we have an array of objects, each of which has a date property, which is a JavaScript date object, and then num downloads, which is a number. Okay, fantastic. Now we're finally in a position to generate a line for our line chart. But first, let me clean this up a little bit. Parse date does not need to be defined for each row. Let's define that outside. And that could even be outside the function because it's pretty much a constant. And then, this could even be simplified a little bit more. Date is that. And then we could use the more concise syntax with the parentheses around our object. Oh, I'm missing a comma. There we go. That's just a little bit cleaner. All right, so now that we have parsed data, we can render this line. And for lines, we're going to use SVG paths. And we need to set the D attribute based on some kind of a line generator. And this line generator from D3, it'll be a function that takes as input an array. And so for data, let me actually make this an array that contains a single element, which is the data, our one time series. It's set up like this so that if you had multiple time series, you could visualize them as multiple lines. But we just have one line. And we don't need CY or R. And I'll just set the fill to be black. Or, it's going to be lines, so, we need the stroke to be defined. All right, so let's make our line generator. And we're going to use line from D3, which is part of the D3 shape package. And let's see what the AI comes up with, because it's pretty straightforward. Okay, that looks fairly good. So we create a line generator by calling this function, which is pretty much a constructor. And then we specify these accessors for X and Y. Now the problem with this code is it doesn't project it into pixel coordinates, so we need X scale and Y scale to project these into pixel space. And one of these is going to be a scale time, because we're working with dates. And then the other is going to be a linear scale, because the number of downloads is a quantity that we just want to map linearly to screen coordinates. Scale linear. And both of these we need to import from D3. Okay, we've imported scale time and scale linear from D3. Now we need to set these up. And before we do that, we need to define our margin. we need a margin first because that will inform our scales. Unless we want the line to go all the way to the edge, which we don't. We don't. So I'll set the top margin to be 10. And I'll just fill in all the various parts of the margin, top right, bottom left. And we can tweak those later. So now, with scale time, we set the domain to be, well, it should be the min and max dates, right? And so let's see if the AI can do that. Yeah, D3 min and max, but really what I want to do is use extent, because d3.extent will compute the min and the max and return it as an array, which we can pass directly into .domain. Now we just need to import extent from D3. Okay, so that's the domain, and then the range will be to do with the margins and also the width and height. And so this looks about right. For the X scale, the range will go from margin left to width minus margin right. But width, let me pull this out into a nice variable called width. And I'll define that right up here. Const width equals container.clientWidth. And that's what we can use for the width value of our SVG. And then the same for height. And this is container.clientHeight. So now we have width and height available for our scales. Okay, that looks about right for the X scale. For the Y scale, it'll be pretty similar. And the AI suggested that the domain is the extent of the number of downloads, which I think it is. I think that's what it is in the NPM downloads. Although maybe it goes from 0 to the max. I don't know. But the range looks right. It's height minus margin.bottom to margin.top. Okay, now we should be able to actually see some data coming through. Let's see if there's any errors. No, I don't see any. So we have this array. Is there anything in our DOM? We have a path with no D attribute. It's kind of weird. Well, let's see what we get if we just do console.log line generator of data. It gives us null. That's strange. Let me just take a quick look at another example I did. This one, pseudo line chart. So this has all the basics set up. Oh, you know what? Sorry. It's just a variable name that's wrong. Yeah, this is probably null because data refers to the original JSON data, but we need to use parsed data instead. So let me just put that here. And we get something to show up. Amazing. Look at that. Let me just marvel at that for a minute. Let me check if the stream is working. Oh, it says 5 watching now. How y'all doing? Okay, well, we got 4 viewers. That's sweet. I feel like I'm on TV. All right. Okay, well, this thing basically works, but we don't want the fill. That you know, the default fill of black is causing some problems there, so let me set the fill to be none. Now we get this line. However, this is daily data, but what we want is the weekly data, right? Ideally, there would be like an API that gives us that data, but we are currently working with the daily data instead. So my question is, how would we aggregate this? You know, if we have data for every day and we want data for every week, I guess we would add them, right? Use the sum aggregation operator. So let me solve that problem first before we work on the interaction. I want to have something called weekly data. Where should this go, though? I suppose up here with the data parsing. And instead of parsed data, I'm going to call this daily data, just so it's a clear contrast to weekly data. And this is where the AI could really be useful. Let's see what this AI sys could do here. What do you got? Daily data.reduce. This is insane. Okay, so it's reducing and checking for every 7 days, and then it's doing the sum. I feel like this is a pretty long-winded way to do it because D3 has utilities for aggregation. There's D3 group and D3 rollup. And then there's also D3 time, which will tell us which week a day is in. Yeah, there's time interval. So what I'm thinking is we figure out which week each day is in, and then we aggregate based on that with the nice D3 utilities. So there's time week. It says here time week is an alias for time Sunday, which is weird, but 7 days. Okay, so let me try this. Let me try pulling in. Yeah, I don't trust this code. It's too long-winded. I mean, it probably works, but let's use D3 instead. And you know what? This really should be part of get data because the data viz logic doesn't need to know about this necessarily. So let me just move this over to get data. Although, I don't know. It's kind of nice that get data just does that one thing. I don't know. I'll leave it like this for now. Although, I don't know. Ideally, we could memoize this. Well, let's just get it working, and we can think about how to clean it up. All right, so const weekly data is, well, I want to use D3 group on a field of daily data, which is, I suppose, week. And week will be, I think, time week dot floor of date, which is over here. Ooh, I need to get access to date like this. So let me move it back to that other format with the explicit return. All right, so now date is parse date, and we can pass it into timeweek.floor, and we need to import time week from D3. There's some kind of a syntax error. What is it? Where's that error? Oh, weekly data equals nothing. There we go. Okay, now it's prettified. And we should have week. Let me just see if that worked. Console.log daily data. And there's some downstream errors, but it doesn't matter. All right, week is the Sunday. Look at that. Okay, excellent, excellent. This is how you can use d3.week or time week dot floor to pass in a date, and it will take that interval of that week and sort of round it to the nearest week. So it'll go back to the previous the Sunday that is most close to this date, but in the past. And this is the input to our aggregation. So now let's do the aggregation. And for that, we can use D3 group, where we just pass in the data, and it gives us some kind of a grouped aggregation. However, I think what we really want is rollup. Or flat rollup, to be precise, because it gives you nice arrays as output. Let me see some examples of flat rollup. Yeah, okay. So this is nice. This is really nice. Here's how flat rollup works. It aggregates data. So in this case, we got a bunch of penguins. This is the observable example by Phil. Shout out to Phil. Amazing work. Now, the first argument to flat rollup is the data, which is an array of things. And then the second argument is the function that computes the aggregation on this thing they call it V here, which is the subset of the original array that matches one particular group. And the grouping is all these other arguments. So in this case, they're actually using 3 different things. So for every unique combination of species, island, and sex, which is gender, it's producing an output row. So we're going to do something very similar, but we're just going to aggregate by week. So I'll copy this example, stash it in a comment, and then I'll import flat rollup from D3. And now I think I have everything I need to say, okay, weekly data is a flat roll-up of the daily data. Aggregated by sum, not count. This one actually aggregates by count. But how do we sum this together? TBD. Let's just do count for now. Get it to work. And then the group by, so to speak, will be week. All right, let's see, what does this get us? And I'll just leave a to-do. Sum this, not count. But did this even work? Daily data. Or sorry, weekly data. Let's console.log the weekly data. I think it worked. So, yeah, it worked. And there are 7. The count is always 7. Well, that makes sense because there's 7 days in a week. And we should probably reformat this to be objects instead of arrays. But first, let's get the sum going. And that's going to be sum. How do we do sum? There must be a pretty easy way. Isn't there like an array utility? And I think GC is in the house. Feel free to start typing if you know the solution. I feel like there should be a D3 sum or array.sum. I mean, yeah, we could just say, reduce. I feel like there should be a utility function. Oh, there's D3.sum. Look at that. Okay, great. Hey, there it is, D3.sum. You could just pass an array into D3.sum. Who knew? Nice. You got it. You got it. Thank you, GC. And we just got past in V there. There you go. And I got the import. I'll grab that sum, import it from D3. And let's run this and see. And you know, there's all these downstream errors, so I'll just return here just so we don't have to look at that. All right, let's see what we got. All right, it's all 0. Oh, you know what? V is not an array of numbers. V is the original array of rows. And sum takes as input a second argument, which is the accessor. So I believe we need to use, yeah, you got it, v dot, or d, d goes to d dot num downloads, I think it was called. Yeah, num downloads. Sweet. Oh, nice, you ran it, and it worked. I think it worked. Yes, 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 look at this. This is great. And, yeah, I haven't heard from you, GC. I hope your audio is working if you want it to, but we can do like this, silently as well. But anyway. Yeah, this is looking great. This is looking great. I think what I want to do now is just map over it and format it like this, where we have an array of objects, where each object has num downloads and week. Or date, rather. Date. So to do that, I'll just map over these and return an object that has num downloads and date. Or we could say week. I guess week is fine. And you know, D here is an array of 2 elements, so we could actually just destructure those 2 elements and name them here. So now we have an array of, you know, this could have come straight out of this could have come straight out of an API that gives you weekly data. So it's relatively clean. Now it's an array of objects, each of which has num downloads. Oop, that's the date. Just got to reverse these. Week should be, okay, num downloads is a number, and week is the date. Excellent, excellent. Okay, now let's visualize this, and that'll get us one step closer. Okay, so we use the weekly data, passing that into the extent and the path stuff. And if I run this, we should see, oh, I have to change this to week, not date. And actually, you know what? I really, really like to just set up things called X value and Y value, so that if we change one of the field names, like we changed date to week, then we just have to modify it in one place, not multiple places. And so X value will be a function that takes as input D and returns D.week. And then we can use that here and here. X value of D. Yeah, this is better. Now we just have to change it in one spot if we ever need to change it. And then D for the Y value goes to D dot num downloads. And then we can use Y value here. And also over here. Yeah, I feel like this cleans up nicely. And there it is. There is our line. Hooray! Now, it looks kind of like the original from NPM, but it's got like zeros for the start and end, I guess, which is kind of sketchy. So, I don't know what to do about that. Maybe just, well, that would suggest that the data just wasn't lined up to Sundays. Well, it's a data question. I would say we can just not look at the first and last rows. And I'll call it filtered data. How would that look? Yeah, weekly data.slice. And we could just tack on that .slice over here, and we wouldn't need another variable. Okay, that looks better. That looks more similar to this one over here. However, you know what? When I see this, I realize it's not actually based on the extent. The Y scale is not based on the extent because it doesn't go all the way down to the bottom. Maybe it's actually a zero baseline line chart, and it's actually an area chart. So, yeah. If it's an area chart, it's kind of like a bar chart where I kind of feel like it should be a zero baseline, not based on the extent. So let me fix that. And I'll just clean up this code a little bit. And for posterity, I'll add a little explanation. Just because they don't seem accurate. Okay, so the Y scale does not have a zero baseline. It's using extent. But instead, to make this have a zero baseline, I would say the domain starts at 0, and so the bottom of it is representing the number 0, and then it goes up to the max across this stuff. And we're going to have to import max from D3. Oh, you got it. Nice, nice. Sorry, we had a conflict. All right, well, it's there now. Okay, that looks good. That looks pretty similar to this here. Maybe let's just copy these colors now, Make it look exactly the same. Oh, sorry. Someone's calling me. Hold up. Okay, sorry for the interruption. We're back. Oh, right. So let's get this purple. I want to make our line chart look exactly like this line chart, or area chart rather. And to get colors, I like to use GIMP, which should be starting up. Here it is. Yeah, so now we can zoom in and get these colors with this color picker. Could use something fancy like Figma, but I kind of like open source. Okay, so let me define some brand colors. And let's call these dark. And there we go. We get our little VisHub color picker if you wanted to change it. And then light for the background. So I'll just pick that color there, grab that, put a hash in front of it, and there's our brand colors. And I'll just make a comment, you know, colors for the area chart. Grabbed from NPM itself. Okay, so let me make this line that color. And what's the background of the whole thing? It's just white, isn't it? Yeah, the background is just white. So let me get rid of this background on the SVG. The SVG itself, you could make the background any color, but let's just make it white. And since that's the default, we don't even need to put anything there. Alright, so over here for our path, the stroke, which is the filled in line, will be brand colors.dark. So now we get a purple line. And fill will be none. Now this is the line. I think what we're going to have to do to get it to be the same as this is to make actually two separate SVG paths. One for the line on the top, and then another one for the filled in area. And D3 is really good at this sort of thing. And I'll just make some comments like render the line on the top and then render the filled in area. And it's going to be nearly exactly the same as this, but instead of line, we will be using area from D3, which is also from the D3 shape package. I'll import that. And then we just need to rename our variables. So I'll call this area generator, and I'll use this as the D attribute of this one over here. And let's put the fill to be brand colors.light. And the stroke should be none. Oh, you know what I think is happening is it's clobbering the other path because we need to disambiguate these two somehow, and we could use a class to do that. So we could set the attribute of class, but here's a fun fact. There's also another method called classed on D3 selections. I forgot the API of that. Yeah, let me just check out that API documentation real quick. So selection.classed names and value. So this is good for when you have a bunch of existing class names and you want to sort of surgically add and remove. And, you know, I've seen some people use this as the go-to style for setting classes, and it works just as well as the .ettr. It's just a little more classy. So I'll say classed, I'll call this line. And then we can say select all path.line to be clear what we're dealing with. And this unlocks having multiple paths that have different classes that are fed by different things. So I'll give the second one a class of area. And you got it, GC path.area. There we go. There we go. That's exactly right. Now, there appears to be something wrong with our area generator. I feel like the API is a bit different. It has like x1 and y1. Let me just search for the docs. Yeah, area. So there's y, but there's also y0 and y1. Okay, so I think we may need to specify y1 and y0. Yeah, so y1, let me say y1, y0, or y0, y1. And I suppose one of these is supposed to be y scale of 0. There we go, there we go, there it is, there it is. Okay, that looks pretty good. Yeah, this is important because it's not clear what it's supposed to be. We need to specify it. And this will just give us margin bottom, actually. So now that I think of that, we could say y0 is bottom? Margin dot bottom? Oh, no. Oop. I mean margin dot, hold on. Well, we just do like this. It's fine. But we could just pass a value in there too. Either way. I kind of like this because it's consistent. Okay, now we have it showing up. Now let's get the style to be exactly the same. Over here, there's some thickness to this line. And let's get our line to be a little thicker as well. And for that, we can specify stroke dash width. And this can be, I don't know, 5. And with VizHub and the hot reloading, you can alt drag and try different numbers. Hey, that's kind of interesting how it goes outward. Oh, you know what? It's because of the ordering in the DOM. Yeah, the line, okay, I want the line actually to be on top of that area. So let me move this down so that we draw the area first and then we draw the line. So now the line should be on top. Yeah. So now it's, oh, it's not. I gotta do a hard refresh. I think it is now. Okay. Yeah, so that's what the line looks like if we tweak the thickness of it. Let me take a look at the NPM version and see if it's jagged. I think it is jagged. So we could set the line cap and the line join attributes, but since the goal is to reproduce this, I would say we don't have to. It's pointy in theirs, and it's kind of pointy in ours. Although it's got more of a cap to it. It doesn't have that downward spike. Let me try stroke dash line join is, well, let me look up what the options are on MDN. Okay, these are the different options: arcs, bevel, miter, clip, and round. I wish they had some examples. Well, it's alright. I'll just try each one. What does arcs do? Nothing. What is bevel? Is this even updating? Yeah, it is. So round is good. I don't know. None of these seem to get as pointy as the original. So, you know, maybe we could just forget about it. Just leave it as the defaults. Okay, so that's pretty good. That's pretty close to the NPM look. Let me just tweak the margins to get it to be a small thing, because remember, we're trying to make it a tiny little spark line, a small representation. And we're going to go for this. Actually, this kind of fails under different screen sizes. But we're going for something like this. So let me set up the margins in such a way that that appears on the right side to make room for this number. We're going to put this number in there too. So I'll put it over to the left side by just tweaking these margins. Yeah, that's looking pretty close. That's looking pretty similar. So now we can either add the interactivity, the hovering interactions, or add the number. Now I'm curious, what is the number in NPM if we don't hover? It's just, I guess, the most recent number. And it says weekly downloads. So we could just do that. Yeah, let's do that first. So let's render a text element. Okay, the AI got us to a place where there's a little bit of text, which is cool, but it's not using the right pattern. This will append a new text element every time. So let's do, and actually, is SVG what we want? Yeah, that's all right. Let's just put it straight onto the SVG. Let's do svg.selectAllText.data null, an array with a single element, which is null, dot join text. That's better. And then since we are pretty much prototyping, I'm just going to hard code these and tweak them to be approximately right. And with the hot reloading, I can actually do that. And then let's set the font size to be something like 30 pixels. And now we can tweak that. And we could even go so far as figuring out what the font is and getting the color, because I don't think that's black. Yeah, here's the designer in me wanting to get the exact color of the text. Let's get it. Now, what color is that text? It's not black. It's all threes. So I'll put that in my brand colors as text. And then down, when we define our text element, we can say .attr. Fill is going to be brand colors.text. Okay. It's a slightly gray. And then what is this font? We can inspect element and go over to styles and say font family. There it is. It's Source Sans Pro. Source Sans Pro. Is that a paid font, I wonder? Well, there's Source Sans 3, which I guess is the same from Google Fonts. Okay, sweet. Well, let's pull in this one. We can say get font, and then get embed code, and then I like to use the import version of this, because then we can go over here and make a new CSS file. I'll make a file styles.css and just paste that in there. And then we can say all of our text, our SVG text elements, get the font family of we set it here like this, font family source sans 3. I'll paste that in there. And it falls back to the system sans serif font in case it's not there. But now all we need to do is import that CSS. Import /styles.css, and now we get the text in a different font. Hooray! I'm going to pour some coffee real quick. All right, so we need to put a number in this text. You want to give it a shot? I can try out this auto follow feature, which should follow your cursor if you move around. So we have to get the maximum date, which is going to be the last element in the array, and then use that value as our text. So I will take the weekly data and instead of text to display, well, actually I kind of like that. I'm going to make a variable called text to display. This kind of decouples the rendering from the calculation. And then we can say, all right, our text to display is going to be weekly data at index weekly data dot length dot, well, no, hold on. We have the y value, right? So we could just say y value of that datum. Oh yeah, -1. Thank you. Good call. Good catch. Yes, there it is. Hooray, we got our number. Now, let's put the commas there. I mean, it's not formatted properly. And for that, we can use another utility from D3, which is format. And I'll say const format comma is format of a specifier. And I think if I just put comma, it'll do the right thing. So this is a number formatting utility that takes a domain-specific language string to specify the format. And I think if you just put comma, it'll put commas in between the thousands. Let's find out. So we can just pass this through the format comma function. And we get commas. There it is. All right. That's how you can use D3 format to add commas between your thousands. Okay, now for the truly fun part, which is adding this interaction. Let's add the interaction that NPM has. Just to quickly review what that is, if you go to an NPM package, you can hover like this. And when you hover, it does a bunch of things. It adds a line, a vertical line. It adds a point on that line that intersects with the line of the area chart, and then it updates the count number, and it also updates the dates at the top. So let's make it happen. Okay, so we want to listen for mouse events, namely mouse move events. I suppose we could listen on the SVG itself. And that would look like something like svg.on, mouse move, a function that takes as input the event, and I like the fat arrow syntax myself. And let's see if this works. Console.log event. Okay, we get a mouse event. Now, getting the actual mouse position is notoriously tricky, and D3 has a utility for that. Let me see if I can find that. whoops. In the D3 docs, I think it's called pointer. Handling events, pointer, event, and target. Okay, excellent. Let's try this. This should give us really perfect X and Y values based on the mouse event. I'll just paste that, and then let's log X and Y, and we also need to import pointer from D3, which I'll do right there. Okay, so now if I hover, I do get X and Y coordinates. Excellent, excellent. Now, the only thing we really need is X, because Y is determined by the data. So let me change this around a little bit and say X is pointer event at index 0. And it increases as we move to the right. Okay, so now what we need to do is isolate the datum that matches where we've hovered. And how do we do that? Well, first we need to get the date that we've hovered on by inverting the scale. And so we can say const date equals x scale dot invert x. And I think that should give us a date. Let's see if that worked. Sure enough, it does. Amazing. All right, that gives us the exact day that we're hovering over, but our data is rounded to the weeks. So how do we get the right one? I think in the past I've seen bisect used for this sort of thing. Using bisect is definitely an option. We could also use D3 time week dot floor on our date and then look up the original datum based on that date. But how would that lookup happen? It's almost like we need a map and we need to use a date as a key. I don't know. I like the bisection idea because it's general purpose. It'll work for any data. So yeah, let me do that. It'll be more useful, in case we want to use this code for something else in the future. So I'll say to do use bisect to isolate the datum, and I'll see what the AI can do. Yeah, that looks about right. All right, let's import bisector from D3. There it is. And so it's saying, all right, we're going to make a bisector and use dot left. Yeah, because when you bisect, you have to choose, bisection, by the way, is when you have a bunch of values and you want to figure out between which pair of adjacent values is your value. And so do you want the one that's to the left of you or the one that's to the right of you? I think in this case we want the one that's to the left. I mean, it doesn't really matter. We just want the closest one. So that should be fine. And then we can call that function, passing in the data, our date, and 1. I don't know, I'll have to look up the docs for that. But that should give us the index in the array, and then we just look up the value based on the index. Let me see if that worked. Console.log datum. And now when we hover, sure enough, it worked. Hooray! All right, this is most of the work for the interaction, really. It's just isolating the datum that you're hovering on. But let me check the docs real quick. I want to know what this function argument is. All right, bisecting data, bisector accessor returns a new bisector using the specified accessor function. Okay, there's bisector right and bisector left. Well, actually, what did our code call? It was the return value from bisector.left called as a function, and it was the third argument. What is this third argument? I don't know. I'm having trouble figuring this out. And you know, I learned though in this documentation that there's a thing called .center, which returns the index of the closest value to x, which is actually what we want. We want to get the closest datum, not the floored one or the ceiling. So let me use .center instead. And that still works. And what if I leave out this one? Like, what does that even do? Does it do anything? It looks like we don't need it. It looks like it's working just fine without that. Maybe it was an AI hallucination. Okay, now we have this, and we're ready to move on to the next step, which is showing this datum in the ways that NPM does. Namely, when you hover, you get this vertical line. Let's start there. Let's start with one thing. Or maybe the circle. Let's start with the circle. Why not? There's a little circle there. So let's try to make that happen. The first step towards making that happen is tracking this hovered datum on our state. So I'll call this hovered datum. And then I'm going to actually just call set state. Where we use immutable update patterns to set hovered datum on our state. So now we should have state.hovered datum available to us, in which case we can render that as a circle. So let's see if we can do that down here. All right, it basically worked. Wow. Okay, I just used the AI to do all that. Let's see what it actually did. So svg.select all circle.hover, love it. .data state.hover datum, okay, perfect. It's an array with a single element. And then class hover is true. Yep, so it matches the selector. And then we set cx and cy based on d. Now, this code is checking if d exists, and if it doesn't, it returns null. I don't really like that. I don't really like that at all. I'm going to clean this up a little bit and say hover datum is coming from our state. And I don't know, it just kind of feels weird to me to put this as the data. So I'm going to say, all right, if there is no, well, if there is a hovered datum, let's use an array with a single element. Otherwise, we use empty array, which should remove this circle. And that makes me think, well, we should actually add the event listener. So when we hover off of it, it updates this to be null. That's a whole other problem. But anyway, the CX is going to be x scale of x value of hovered datum. And then we don't need any of that conditional logic because we did that check over here. And then same for y. And then we set the radius to be 9, which seems pretty close. Let's see what it is in NPM. Oh, it's filled in. And it's just a little larger than the line. So let me set fill to be brand colors.dark. And there is no stroke. So now that looks actually very, very similar. Yeah. There it is. Amazing. Okay. When we hover off of it, it should go away. But maybe I'll save that to the last part because we have it essentially working. Maybe now let's update this number. I mean, that's very low-hanging fruit as a thing to do next. See, now that we have hovered datum, we can use this in the code above, namely this text stuff here, and say, all right, our text to display is, do we have a hovered datum? If so, it's going to be format comma of, actually, let me move this in here. It's going to be format comma of y value of something in any case. Right. So let's put it in here. If there is a hovered datum, it's going to be hovered datum passed into y value. Otherwise, it'll be the last element of our weekly data passed into y value. And that should work. All right, it works. We get the numbers to show up. Check it out. It's working. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Maybe draw that vertical line, because in NPM there's a vertical line going all the way from, look, the margin top to margin bottom. Let's put that in there as well. And that'll be pretty much the same pattern as this, but instead of circle, this will be line. And lines in SVG have x1, y1, x2, y2, I believe. So let's put x1 to be the value from the x scale. And actually that should be x2 as well. And then we got y1 and y2. And these should just bring us from the bottom to the top, basically. So y1 will actually be, well, you know what? We've already figured this out in the y scale. So we could just, I don't know, it seems pretty easy to access yscale.domain at index 0 for y1 and then index 1 for y2. And then R is not relevant, and I think we need to set the stroke on a line. There it is. Hooray! But it's problematic. It doesn't. It's not really right. I was a little too lazy on the Y's. Let's just think about it like from first principles. So Y1 should actually be margin dot top, right? And look at that, a hot reloaded with our state. See, this is the craziest thing. Hot reloading. I love it. If I hover over a specific value and I update the code for Y2, for example, to be height minus margin dot bottom, it hot reloads and updates instantly. So it actually got fixed right there. Now let's just make this a little thicker. And I already have a piece of code that sets stroke width, so I'll just grab that and apply that to our line. There we go. That's a little too thick though. See, I can hover over it, and because we're not doing the hover off, I can use hot reloading to preview different values of this thickness. So that looks about right. Okay, sweet. Now we're down to just like 2 more things to do, which is make sure we know when we're no longer hovering over the area chart, and add all the other stuff from the NPM design. Namely, this text here that says weekly downloads, and it changes when you hover. So I think I'll start there, and there's this icon. That's a pretty cool icon. I'm curious what this icon looks like. Okay, that's just an SVG icon. So, you know, let me pull that in. Why not? So if I select this group element and then I say copy outer HTML, that should give us this HTML here. Whoops. So I'll put that as a comment. Now, yeah, I kind of want to just, you know, add this little icon. Why not? So we can say SVG. Well, there's a couple of different ways we could do it. We could just set the inner HTML of an element. Or we could use D3. So what is it? A group element with a polygon. Yeah, we already have it like this. So let me just make this happen. I'll say, all right, we're going to have a group element, which is the downloads icon, or I'll just call it icon. Dot join G, and we're just going to want one of these. Set up the class. And then I think with D3 we could just say .html and pass it an HTML string. So I'll put this polygon and make sure we don't have that closing G tag. And there it is. There's a little icon. Now let's just move it around. And you know, this is going to be a part of our text where if we move it, it should all move together. So let me just set up a group element for our text labels. And I'll call that text labels G. And then we can put the icon inside of that. And let's also put this number inside of that. Here it is. So yeah, instead of going on to the SVG, that goes on to text labels G. Okay, this is pretty much working. Now, instead of setting the X and Y on that inner text element, I'm going to set the transform on the parent group element so we can move them all around at the same time. Transform will be translate of, well, let me just put some numbers in here. See what happens. Now the X and Y of our text should be reset to 0, I think. Now we can just move this parent around and the icon moves with it. Yeah, and then we can do the same for that icon group to move these things around. Yeah, so there's our little icon moving all around. So that should go up towards the top. And it's pretty small. And then there needs to be some text, right, that says weekly downloads. And let me grab that color as well. Go back over to GIMP. Paste that image. Zoom into here. Grab that gray. And then in our code, we can call that text light. And I'll just paste that color there. And then we set the fill kind of like this to brandcolors.textLight. And this is going to go on our other text, actually, which we haven't created yet. So let me just copy this one. And we can refactor this in a bit to simplify things. I don't know. I don't think we need this text anchor. We can use the defaults. And then the font size, we can pull up that definition to the parent group element. So we just need to put it in one place. Okay, there was a syntax error. I fixed it. Now, we're doing this for two text elements in the same parent, so we need to disambiguate them with classes again. This is going to be the download count. So I'll give this a class of download count. And then for the other one, that can get a class of maybe label. It's going to be this thing here that switches from saying weekly downloads to saying the dates. So what should we call that? Label. I'll just call a label. Okay, let's see what we've got. Got some errors. Cannot read properties of undefined. That's not good. Is there something accessing hover datum? Yeah, there it is. I think this is the bug where it's hover datum is undefined, but it's being passed in here. So I think the thing to do is this, where we make that the datum, and we can say D goes to like this. I think that should fix our error, which happens before you've hovered over anything. I don't know. I do a hard refresh. That same error is there. Oh, is this from the data fetching now? Wait, did our data fetching start to fail? No, that's weird. No, it's definitely loading because it's there. I think there's just a case where we're accessing hovered datum before it's defined. Oh, here it is. Oh, yeah, it's right there. It's the same thing. It's the same kind of a pattern with the lines. So let me just do the same kind of a treatment. This way, the function, like, it won't attempt to evaluate this code unless there is a hovered datum. The problem before is that it's setting x2 to be a constant, and it's always evaluating this code, even if hovered datum is undefined. This is one way to solve that. Okay, well, we're almost there. We just need to add that text label. So the text of this label should start out saying weekly downloads. There's something going on where it's sort of crashing out. It's not running prettier for me. Ooh. Okay, I think it's working again. Okay, this is the one that's I don't see showing up. Oh, it's probably because there's a wacky translate going on. No. Okay, this is the parent group element that contains all of our text labels. Sorry, I wasn't thinking straight when I put this there. That's not right at all. Okay, that's the parent group element. Now there's the download count, and there's the text label. And instead of text to display, this one should be weekly downloads. And there it is. And now we can make these positioned a little differently. I think I'll just use the Y attribute to move one of them down a little bit. And then in NPM, I wonder, are those the same text size? I think that's a little smaller. That looks a little smaller to me. So I'll put the font size on this one. And I'll format it like this so I can drag this and change it around. Okay, that looks about right. And the icon, I don't know, the icon is not scaled properly. Because in this example, oh, there we go. That's a nice way to scale it up pretty easily. So I'll just put this right in the corner. Well, it should be next to where it says weekly downloads, and then we need to move weekly downloads over to the right a little bit. So for that, I will set the Y, or sorry, the X attribute to be like 10, or tweak that to position it properly. There we go. And then that icon really should be filled in with brand colors text light. So I wonder if I set that on the group element. Oh, it does work. It does propagate through. See? That's nice. Okay, now we just need to move this so that it lines up, and we're pretty much done. And that lies in the translate of the text labels G element. So we got X and Y. I'll just tweak the Y so that it lines up. And there we go. I mean, that's pretty much it, right? That's pretty much it. Let's see NPM. I mean, that's pretty darn close. Oh, we need to have that show the date range. When you hover, that's the last remaining item. And actually that text goes over, it could potentially go over that line chart. So we need to move it a little bit more up. Yeah, and then I'll just bring this one down. Okay, so if we have a hovered datum, that weekly downloads text should show the date range, which is going to be 1 week of time. So there's weekly downloads. We can have another version of text to display. And now I'm questioning that variable name. I'll call this download count text. That way it's consistent with the classes. And then we can introduce another thing down here called label text. And then I have to upload that one reference of it right there. So now we have label text, and that's going to come down here. And this weekly downloads text will be the case where there is no hovered datum. So I'll comment out that old stuff for now and say, yo, is there a hovered datum? If so, we want to render, min to max kind of a thing. Otherwise, that's when we render weekly downloads. Now we just need to figure out this min max text. And that's going to be based on the hovered datum. So hovered datum dot, well, the x value, right? That's the date, so x value of hovered datum. And when we run that, it just shows us that date. So it's getting there. We just need to format that date. And for the date formatting, we can use just the same approaches we did for the parsing. So I'll say format date is time format of the same exact specifier. And time format we need to import from D3. Yeah, I'll just put it at the bottom. So now we can say format date of that date. Here it is. Label text is, let's just add a format date right here. There it is. Now, to figure out the max, we just need to add 1 week to that, which should be pretty straightforward. So I'll replace that string max with the same thing. Now they are the same. And then we just need to offset this by a week, which I think we can do with time week dot something dot offset. Let me figure out the docs. We got time week. And this is actually interval. So let's see, interval dot, what have we got? Offset. Yeah, this is it, interval dot offset. So we could do time week dot offset, pass in our date, and say, all right, give me 1 week later. So step would be 1. So there it is, time week dot offset. And we pass in this date here, and then we say the offset is 1. And that seems to have worked. See, if you look at the numbers now, it's 702 to 709. Those are 7 days apart. And it's updating. Amazing. So now the very last remaining item is to quote unquote unhover when our mouse goes outside of that area. And that's where we used pointer. We got X and Y. And you know, now that I think of it, I think we're going to want access to Y. So I'll bring back this other destructuring syntax. And so I think the easiest way to do this is probably to just check if it is inside the bounds of our margin. So let's say check if the coordinates are within our margin. And this is where the AI would probably be pretty good. Yeah, that looks about right. X is greater than or equal to margin.left, and all these various comparisons. Okay, so if it is, let me just say if it is in the margin, then we do something. Else, we do all this other stuff that we were doing before. And you know what might be the easiest way to do this is just to say let hovered datum is null. And if it is in the margin, that's when we want to do this stuff here. And then we can assign hovered datum to be that. And then we don't even need an else. And in either case, we set state to that hovered datum, which is null if we're outside the margin. So that should work. Let me see if that works. We're hovering inside the margin, then when we go outside the margin, all right, it resets. Perfect. Top, bottom, left, right, it works. It works. Amazing. Amazing. And you could finesse it and get the layout exactly perfect, but this is basically how to recreate this interactive line chart from NPM. Oh, I'm so glad I got it working. Any questions? Awesome in the YouTube chat. Thank you. Thank you. There's a question from the YouTube chat. Can you create a tree view listing the week, and then when clicked, it displays the daily for that week? That's a cool idea. I'm not sure what you mean by tree view. But yeah, I mean, with this D3 stuff, sky's the limit. I'm sure if you could imagine it, if you could sketch it out, you could implement it. Tree view. It's a question of terminology. What do you mean by tree view? I don't get it. Something like this? Or a node link diagram? I don't know. It's probably possible. Got another question. Can you please describe how to convert the code to vanilla.js? Vanilla.js. Well, if we're using vanilla.js, I assume that means no D3. All right, so that's a little tricky because there's all these utilities. So step one would be implement all these utilities in vanilla JavaScript and then call them. But if you mean, if by vanilla JavaScript you mean no frameworks, but still using D3, that's what this is. I mean, this is vanilla JavaScript. There's no frameworks at play. It's just this set state and set, this state and set state pattern. Like, there's no framework aside from state and set state, which is this sort of a quasi framework that I invented. Let me show you how that's implemented. I've got this open source repository called Vite export template for VizHub, and when you export something out of VizHub, like this, if you click download the code, it gives you this zip file with regular old source files that are vanilla JavaScript. They're just regular files. But this index.js assumes that it's going to be called with a container, which is a DOM element, and then state and set state. And these things are defined in this Vite app example. They're defined internally in VizHub as like part of the runtime environment is how I think about it. But there's really nothing super fancy going on. This is the entire implementation, including some hot reloading support with Vite. But basically, this is it. And so if you want to run this on your own outside of VizHub, then I would suggest to copy this implementation of state and set state into your app. Or if you wanted to wrap it as a React component, you could do that too, because state and set state is compatible with React. You could just say const, state, comma, set state is use state initialized to an empty object. And that's what this is. So I hope that answers your question. Oh, you meant to take the code from VizHub to JS. I mean, it is JS. Like, so VizHub, I mean, it is JavaScript already. But if you're meaning to run locally, I think this is the way to go. Check out this Vite export template. You can clone it, and then just click export on your viz out of VizHub, or just modify these files, and it should all work, including hot reloading with Vite. That's what this stuff does here. If import meta.hot accept, and you're going to have to change around these things. And by the way, it works with npm workspaces. So in VizHub, you can import across vizzes, which we're not doing in this example, but you can. And then when you export it, it gives you all the transitive dependencies. And it's the export is compatible with npm workspaces. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Thanks for the question. This is cool. Maybe I should do more like Q&A with these events. Sweet. Well, I hereby declare this a successful live stream. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And I'll release an edited version of this hopefully in the near future. And let me close out with just a recap. I like to do these recaps at the end. All right, that's pretty much how you can create an interactive sparkline with D3. To recap how it works, we've got this main function that takes as input a container, which is a DOM element, and then state and set state. We measure the container, set up the SVG. We've abstracted the data fetching into this thing called getData, which looks something like this. If there is no data on our state, then we kick off a fetch, and this is using the fetch API, and then we call setState using immutable update patterns to set state.data. And then if there is state.data, then we return that. And in index.js, we check, is the data loaded? If not, let's just do an early return and wait for it to load. Assuming the data is loaded, we process the data here to get it in a reasonable format for us to use. So we go over all the keys of data.d3, which is just in the response. And then we use this date parsing function with parse date, which uses d3 time parse, where we pass this specifier to match the format of our data. And then we use timeWeek.floor to figure out what week this day is a part of, which we're going to use in the next step, which is this aggregation step. So because our original data was daily, but we wanted it to be weekly, we had to do this flat rollup aggregation thing where we pass in the daily data and we pass in a function that will sum the number of downloads over all those days, and then we group it by the week. And then we use flat rollup, which outputs an array of these 2-element arrays. So that's why we just map over those and change them to be objects that have num downloads and the week. And then I just took off the first and last because the data seemed sketchy. See that it looks like zeros or low numbers. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there, but it's problematic, so just take them off. And then we do the visualization stuff. We set up our margin. We set up accessor functions. We set up the X and Y scales. And then we use an area generator to render the area under the curve. And then a line generator to render the line on the top. And then we've got this hover datum thing going on, which we isolate when we move the mouse. When we hover over this, somehow the size is wrong. Yo, the size is wrong on my text. What's going on there? Font size is being set on the parent. Maybe we need to set it on the children. Hold on. No, this is the child. Somehow we lost that. So on the download count, let me bring back the font size and set it to be something a little bigger. There it is. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. But anyway, when the mouse moves, we get the XY coordinates from the pointer event. If it's inside of our margin, then we use xscale.invert to figure out what date we've hovered over. We use bisection to isolate the datum that we've hovered over, and then set that to be hovered datum, which otherwise is null if we're outside of the margin rectangle. Once we have hovered datum, we call setState with an immutable update pattern that just sets state.hovered datum. So if there is a hovered datum, we render this little circle, and we render this little line for it. And we've got a group that contains our text labels. one of which is the download count. And if there is no hovered datum, we just take the most recent value. Otherwise, we take the hovered datum, pass it through the y value, and then pass it through our comma formatter to get this text here. And then there's the label text, which says weekly downloads by default if there is no hovered datum. And if there is a hovered datum, it figures out the week, which is the hovered datum x value, which is the date, and then it's the a week after that using timeweek.offset. And then we got this icon in, which is pretty sweet. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Take care.